Hello and welcome to an all-new KSAT Money Q&A. I'm Ivan Herrera, and today I'm joined by Vee Weir with Vee Frugal Fox, an inclusive online brand for those who are paying down debt, saving money, and working toward their best financial lives. Vee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Thank you. Today on the KSAT Money Q&A, we're going to be discussing personal finance. Now, you have a really interesting background with how you got your start, having to choose between buying medicine or food and eventually paying down a huge debt in less than a decade. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your personal finance background?
Yeah, of course. So I started my debt-free journey in 2016. Like you mentioned, my student loan payments were actually ending on the grace period. And so I had to choose between paying those loans down, food and medicine. And I remember sitting at my kitchen counter, just contemplating how I ended up in this situation. And I decided in that moment on January 4th, 2016, to change my money story. And so I got on a budget. I researched everything I could possibly find about personal finance, and I ended up paying over $50,000 in 1 year. And I just turned it into my job, my passion. So now I am doing it full time.
I love that. It's a lot of money to pay down in 1 year. So I really commend you on that. I found you through Instagram, and I know you're doing a lot of different tips and tricks through Instagram and TikTok. How do you choose what you think is most relevant in terms of helping people with personal finance?
It's really about finding people's pain points. So I mentioned earlier my student loan was coming out of the grace period, and I needed to factor that into my budget, a budget that didn't exist and money that I didn't have. So I think, my audience particularly are millennial women with student loan debt. And so a lot of my tips, tricks, and hacks surround, paying down that debt, saving money, looking at frugal tips, intentional spending. And outside of, my content creation audience, I think it's about what's going on in your life. Your situation may be completely different. So your tailored advice is going to look different. That's why personal finance is personal.
Yeah, definitely. I actually used to have a series called Money It's Personal, and that was the whole thing, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's personal to you. And so I love that. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. We were just talking about student loans, as I'm sure several people's debts are about to come due in about 2 months. It's a scary, really scary situation for those who aren't prepared. What do you think is a good place to get started so these consumers aren't caught off guard when the government comes knocking for the money?
Yeah, the first thing I would say would be get on a budget. And if that B word absolutely scares the crap out of you, I completely understand. Maybe don't go right into a budget, just start tracking your spending. I use the Mint app, but there are tons of apps out there. You can even use a paper and pencil if that electronic thing scares you. But yeah, get on a budget, track your spending, and start seeing where you can cut. A lot of people say, focus on the small things like your Starbucks every day. I personally don't know anybody who drinks Starbucks every day. So I'm a person that always goes to try to cut in the big three. That's transportation, housing, and food. So if you can cut a significant portion of those expenses, you're going to save a lot more money. And I think so many people don't realize that you can negotiate those things. You can find ways to cut things that aren't fun. No one likes to overpay for car insurance. Like you're not getting anything out of that. So try to cut things in the big expenses and then look to your little expenses like your subscription boxes, Hulu, Netflix, et cetera, et
Yeah, definitely. I'm not the paper and pencil type, but I'm also not the app type. So what I
cetera.
like to do is get on the numbers app on my phone and just start using like a little. It's kind of like here's your checks that are coming in,
Hmm.
here's your bills, and it's like your income minus expenses, and this is what you have left over. And
Right.
I think that that's like the most important thing, right? Knowing what you're gonna have left over after you pay all of that extra stuff.
Right.
So now I know a lot of these people are going to have to get second jobs to start paying back those loans. And I know you share a lot about side hustles. What do you think? What's your advice for people who are looking to get their side hustles going, but they think this is a little overwhelming?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's extremely valid. I wish that we lived in a world where you didn't have to get a second job to pay back your loans. I wish there weren't loans to begin with. But that being set aside, I really think that you should look and see what excites you. What other areas outside of your job do you want to pursue? And maybe, you're an assistant, so maybe trying virtual assistance work. For me, I'm a dog lover. I side hustle on Rover and I have my own independent dog sitting service. And I did that because I loved animals. So I thought, how can I make money doing that? I think that's the very first step you need to think about, because if you can find an extra job or a side hustle that you don't hate and you actually really enjoy, you're gonna find a much more easier time making money and not, feeling burnout and overwhelmed. If you can't find something that aligns perfectly with your life or your hobbies outside of your job, there are tons of options, and there are many, many influencers that focus on side hustles primarily. I like to dabble blog is a great one. Side Hustle Pro is another account. And I mean, you can do anything. You can do virtual side hustles. You can do, I mentioned VA work, dog sitting, tutoring. There's something out there for everybody. But my number one piece of advice is try to find something that you actually enjoy, because if I didn't enjoy dog sitting, I spend a lot of time doing it, and that would not be great.
Yeah. You would be really upset if you did not like dogs and were a dog
Yes.
sitter. I love dogs, so I would totally be that person too. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that.
And I've
Um,
made over $15,000 last year just dog sitting on Rover. So, a lot of people out there, there's this kind of narrative that, if you don't make an extra 10 grand at least in your side hustle, it's a waste of time. And I'm like, well, that's a lot of money I could use for groceries. So it doesn't seem like a waste of time to me.
Definitely not. Now, I know that there's some tried and true methods that are always helpful when it comes to roping in your finances. What are the top three tips that you would give to someone just starting to fix their money habits?
Right. So my first advice is to start tracking your spending. You don't have to budget immediately, but start tracking your spending, seeing where you're spending money, where your income's coming in, what are some of the leaks that you could maybe plug later on. Getting a high yield savings account, prioritizing savings. Right now, there's a lot of talk about recession, the student loan payments are resuming. It's kind of scary for the middle class American that has had a 2 or 3 year hiatus from those large payments. So prioritize your saving. And I'm a person that I don't care if you save $5 a month, that $5 is going to come in handy later down the road. And having a high yield savings account like Ally is a great actionable tip that you can do right now. And the other one would just be to really look at those expenses that you're tracking. Is there something that you can cut right now? 20, 30, $40 doesn't seem like a lot, but in the long run, if over a year, you're saving a big chunk of change that could be used for a student loan payment. So those are my three actionable tips.
Definitely. I think those are really great advice. Now, I want to open the floor to you and see if you have any other parting advice for people who may be struggling to just get things going.
Yeah, absolutely. My number one tip for anybody starting in personal finance, and a mistake that I made at the very beginning of my journey, was not having an emergency fund. And emergency funds vary depending on what you have going on in your life. An emergency fund of a single woman living in, I don't know, Minnesota is going to look different than a family of five living in New York City. But prioritizing an emergency fund is so important, because life is going to happen. You're going to have something that you're going to need to cover with liquid cash. And if you don't have that cash available, you're going to go into debt, or you risk racking up credit card debt, which you will be forced to pay even more of because of the interest rate later down the road. So 37% of Americans can't handle a $400 emergency. And I don't want anybody watching or listening to be in that statistic. So make sure that when you are cutting these expenses, you are allocating some money to an emergency fund, because it is so vital to your financial health.
That's one of the biggest things. I think it's what you said about some people can't even afford $400. I think some people can't even afford $100,
Mm-mm.
emergency expense. And I
Yeah.
think that that's really, really important for emergency savings. And I want to thank you so much for answering all of my questions. If people want to find out more about your story or want to follow you with all the content that you're putting out, where can they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Vee Frugal Fox. It's VEE Frugal Fox. And actually, that's my handle for everything. So you can follow me on all the social medias.
Vee Weir with Vee Frugal Fox. Thank you so much for joining me on this KSAT Money Q&A. Have a wonderful day.